is not a privilege, it is the foundation upon which true leadership and connection are built. That is our conversation for the next 30 minutes. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Spark Shift Succeed. I am Melissa Tsodetse, and I have the incredible honor of being your host this morning. As an extension of our mission to deliver not just a speaker, but a memorable leadership experience, this series is designed to move beyond theory and speak directly to what truly drives performance, people, and connection. Today, we are honored to host a remarkable leader whose voice resonates far beyond borders, Linda Kasonde. Linda is a lawyer, activist, and thought leader whose work embodies the courage to confront injustice and the integrity to demand accountability. Her keynote, Injustice Anywhere, is a threat to justice everywhere, reminds us that fairness cannot be fragmented. When justice erodes in one place, it ripples across societies everywhere. In this short but powerful session, Linda will explore the interconnectedness of justice and human rights, challenging us to confront systematic injustice and to act with integrity in our own spheres of influence. Now, with that said, please join me in welcoming our speaker, Linda Kasonde. Over to you, Linda.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. So my presentation is entitled Injustice Anywhere is a Threat to Justice Everywhere. And I wrote this presentation on the anniversary of the letter from a Birmingham jail, which was written by Martin Luther King Jr., many years ago in the 60s. And he had traveled from Atlanta, Georgia, where he was a native, to Birmingham, Alabama, to protest against the Jim Crow laws. The Jim Crow laws, as you know, were very similar to the apartheid laws in South Africa. And in his letter from a Birmingham jail, he basically he was accused firstly of meddling in the affairs of Birmingham, Alabama, when he came from Atlanta, and he basically pointed out that it's the duty of every citizen to challenge injustice wherever it occurs, and to challenge unjust laws wherever they occur, whether through courts, but not to wait for the courts, but to take action wherever the injustice occurs. So just a little bit about me. I'm a lawyer of 25 years, first female president of the Law Association of Zambia, the Bar Association in Zambia, founder of two human rights organizations in the country, Chapter One and LCK Freedom Foundation. And I am also a Tutu Fellow. So globally, democracy is in retreat. And my argument today is that no country is an island, and it affects democracy wherever it occurs. According to Freedom House, this is the 18th consecutive year that Freedom House has reported a global decline in democracy. 55% of countries in the world live either in an autocracy or in a country experiencing democratic decline. And we also know that this is the 30th year in which we're seeing a democratic decline. And it's the 30-year mark is symbolic because this is round about the time when the Cold War ended. And we started seeing, particularly in Africa, the move towards multi-party democracy. So in my presentation, I'm using Zambia, my country of origin, as a mirror for the world. That is to say that whatever is happening in Zambia is symptomatic of democracy globally. So we know, for example, that we're experiencing a shift in democracy, particularly with the Trump presidency and generally the rise in populism across the world. And Zambia has seen similar shifts in its own history. So we obtained independence in 1964, and at the time we were a multi-party democracy. Our president at the time, Kenneth Kaunda, was a huge figure across the African continent who championed independence movements all across the continent, including in South Africa. But in 1972, he orchestrated the move back to a single party state and ruled the country for a total of 27 years. Around the late 80s, we saw agitation amongst the population in the country to move back to multi-party democracy. The trade unions, the church, the women's movement all banded together to activate a movement that essentially unseated Kenneth Kaunda and returned the country to multi-party democracy. And for the period between 1991 to 2011, which is a period of about 20 years, democracy was moving quite smoothly in the country. But once the Patriotic Front government were elected in 2011, we saw the rise of populism. And so began the move towards democratic backsliding, repression, constitutional manipulation, and oppression. Then in 2021, we saw the election of the United Party for Democracy, for National Development, rather. And they promised to reverse the democratic backsliding in the country by being a government of the rule of law and human rights. And that government won a majority of 1 million votes. So they had a strong mandate. And yet, over the past 5 years, we've seen the freedom of assembly laws being weaponized against opposition leaders, against civil society actors, and effectively, there is no public gathering at the moment. We're also seeing the use of cybersecurity and cybercrimes laws. And most recently, we've had a constitutional amendment which effectively gives whoever wins the next election, and most likely the incumbent, a supermajority in our parliament, which would allow them to change the constitution at will. So this is where we are. Zambia is going to the polls in August 2026. How democracies die quietly. It is the slow erosion of institutions. It's the slow erosion of, the justice system and the rise of oppression against citizens. We see, as I mentioned earlier, the weaponization of legislation, and I mentioned the laws to do with freedom of expression and freedom of assembly that have been used by successive governments, and this government included, to stifle freedom of assembly and freedom of expression. We've seen the capturing of the judiciary. Just in this year alone, the government has increased the salaries for the judiciary and indeed also increased the pension benefits of the Chief Justice, not only for him, but his spouse. And to make matters worse, the channels followed were not in line with the constitutional commissions established to actually deal with this. It was done directly by the executive. And then, of course, we see the controlling of the narrative, journalists fired, press briefings interrupted, TV and radio stations threatened. Information becomes the currency, and the government wants to take control of it. And lastly, as I mentioned earlier, the rewriting of the rules. As we know historically, countries like Germany under the Third Reich used the law, in fact, to bring about the dissolution of democracy, and our country has been no exception. I mentioned the Constitution Amendment of 2025, I'll not dwell on it, but basically, constitutionalism seeks to limit the power of the government, and it falls upon us as citizens to reorganize and protect our freedoms. The Constitution is not the property of politicians, it belongs to us. And I think in Zambia, we as a civil society have seen the power of civil society in pushing back against repressive laws and constitutional amendments, the most recent of which has been the Constitutional Amendment Bill number 10 of 2019, which civil society effectively banded together to push back on. We are the ones we're waiting for. And here I touch upon the duty of the citizen to effectively defend its democracy. There is a troubling myth that the work of democracy ends at the ballot box. And so often in between elections, citizens feel that there's nothing they can do. They don't feel empowered to challenge some of the breaches of the rule of law and human rights affected by the government. And this idea that work stops because you have elected somebody is a very skewed view um, of democracy. So we encourage at the LCK Freedom Foundation engaging in community activism and civic education, holding elected representatives accountable in between elections, and using the courts to enforce constitutional rights through public and strategic interest litigation, protecting the digital and physical space for freedom of expression, and resisting divide and rule tactics. Solidarity, not just in Zambia, but across the region by working together with civil society organizations across the region, often acts as a buffer and protection for citizens within the country. What civil society can do. Zambia has a rich history since the return to multi-party democracy in 1991 of civil society holding democracy up where institutions have failed us. We only have to recall the actual movement for multi-party democracy in the late 80s to early 1990s, which effectively saw a constitutional change back to multi-party democracy. We also recall in 2001, the movement by civil society to prevent the then President Chiluba from standing for a third term and amending the constitution to do so. And also, we recall the movement to stop the constitutional amendments of 2019. We use litigation as a tool. We use building coalitions and civic education. Injustice anywhere, the global obligation. Why what happens in one country should matter to everyone. When Martin Luther King wrote his letter from a Birmingham jail, he was addressing the world, not just the United States, because it wasn't just about America. It was about the thought that wherever justice occurs, it must be challenged, because we see that democratic norms are contagious either way, whether in support of democratic consolidation or in the other direction in terms of democratic decline. So, for example, we've seen in the recent election in Hungary, in which the government has been changed from an autocratic ruler to a more democratic dispensation, we see that that emboldens countries around the world, that it is indeed possible, particularly after, as in the case of Hungary, the president was in office for over a decade. In the region, we see the opposite happening in terms of countries like Zimbabwe, where autocratic rulers have been in place for several decades. And their influence on countries in the region, like Zambia, has encouraged moves towards constitutional amendments that remove democratic safeguards from citizens. As what I'm saying is that authoritarianism does not respect borders. We've seen it with the repressive NGO laws that have swept across the continent. We've seen it with moves towards increasing presidential limits in Zimbabwe and even in Tanzania. The same tools are used: repressive legislation, surveillance, disinformation. And these are globally recognized tools used all over the world. The rule of law underpins global systems. Trade, investment, migration, security all depend on a rules-based order. And it is incumbent on us to safeguard that rules-based order. The responsibility of the international community. Democratic backsliding rarely happens in a vacuum. External actors such as bilateral partners, multilateral institutions, and international civil society can either accelerate or decline the resistance to democratic decline. Governments and donors can each use conditionalities in aid and trade to support democratic societies. We can see legal and bar associations use professional networks to support lawyers under threat and to support public and strategic interest litigation to uphold democratic values. The role of the media is important in resisting manipulation of information, disinformation, misinformation, and they also have a role to protect journalists who are also under threat and refuse to be used as surveillance for hire by repressive governments. And lastly, multilateral institutions can enforce democratic norms. And by multilateral institutions, I mean the AU, I mean the UN, can speak up consistently and use their voice to ensure the country's strategic importance and national resources are safeguarded. A call to action, what each of us must do as citizens, wherever we are. As Sierra Leonean lawyer Augustin Mara writes, the rule of law and democratic governance, the rule of law and democratic governance are not the sun and the moon, which rise every day without being summoned. They are the products of our collective efforts, and we cannot leave it to chance. So what can we do as citizens? Firstly, I say know your constitution, read it, understand it, and hold your government to account. Recently, in South Africa, we've seen the EFF challenge the parliamentary decision over Phala Phala. And most importantly, your democratic institutions, such as the judiciary, have upheld the rule of law and constitutionalism wherever it is breached. And so it's important for actors such as political opposition parties or other civic actors to know the Constitution so that they can defend it. Build coalitions across difference. Democracy dies when we let divide and rule tactics fragment us. Solidarity across party, ethnicity, religion, and nationality are our greatest weapon. Now, we've seen this play out not only in Zambia, but also in South Africa, where tribes were divided, where race was divided, to keep people apart and from unifying to challenge injustices in the country. Equally in Zambia, we see tribal affiliation being weaponized. We see political affiliation also being weaponized to prevent people from banding together to challenge injustices. Unity is our greatest weapon. And thirdly, we need to support civil society, fund it, amplify it, work with it. And organizations such as mine are at the front line of defending democracy when institutions fail. Fourthly, speak up safely, strategically. Use every available platform to name what you see. And social media has been a huge weapon in this regard. In the last election, we saw that essentially, because the physical space was closed by the weaponization of our Public Order Act, the digital space became the platform through which our citizens expressed their discontent. And it is through that the incumbent government won the election and by a landslide. And lastly, demand consistency. Hold your government to the same democratic standards you demand of others. Justice is not justice if it is selective. We are the ones that we've been waiting for. The democracy of our dreams will not build itself. Democracy works if we fix it. And these are my own words, as I've quoted from a previous speech. Zambia has shown more than once that citizens can be architects of their own freedom, and so can you, wherever you are in the world, whatever role you hold, whatever institution you serve. Justice requires your courage and not just your sympathy. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Defend it. And that concludes my presentation for today. I'll just end with a slide on some of the work that I have produced around democracy and the rule of law, not just in Zambia, but on the continent. So I thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation.
Thank you so much, Linda, for those incredible pearls of wisdom. And thank you for reminding us that Zambia's story is our story as well. I think most importantly, what you shared with us is not just a powerful reflection on society, it's actually a message that speaks directly to the corporate world. Because in business, injustice shows up as fairness and opportunity, transparency in leadership, and accountability in the way decisions are made. And that is why this conversation matters. And I loved how you reframed it, because it does speak to corporates. Because when corporates put justice at the heart of how they lead, they create workplaces that people thrive, where clients feel valued and communities actually see the impact. And that's not just good ethics, it's good business. Let me engage our people in the chat quickly. We have Paul. Paul said, this session is such a good reminder that we all have influence in seeing our countries moving forward around the globe. I completely agree. Linda, I've got a question for you, and I'd like to bring it back home a little bit. You did share some of the calls to action. And what I've seen is that some of the most common company values are things like ethics, transparency, accountability. Now, my question to you, Linda, is what is one practical step corporates can take today to ensure justice and accountability are not just values on paper, but lived experiences in their organizations?
Well, I think the most important thing is to uphold values that respect transparency, accountability, and truth. So, honestly, we only have to recall the 2008 economic collapse as a result of the dishonesty of several financial institutions that put selfish interests above, the proper evaluation of housing mortgages that resulted in financial collapse across the world. And somewhat unjustly, many of these companies were propped up by governments, which allowed them to continue. And many of these people were not punished adequately for having, caused such a catastrophic event across the world. So absolutely, it's incumbent on all corporates to maintain values of integrity, honesty, fairness, and justice, even in their corporate institutions.
Thank you so much, Linda. You have an incredible voice in our generation. Thank you so much. Truth and honesty, integrity. We have got it. I don't see any questions in the chat so long. Nikki says, thank you, Linda. A very thought-provoking start to a Monday. I could not agree more. But we are wrapping up now. So as we close, let's carry forward Linda's reminder. Justice is not abstract. It is practical. It's the difference between companies that simply operate and those that truly lead. So Linda, thank you so much for reminding us of that and being the anchor of a very important topic. And to all of us, thank you for being part of Spark, Shift, Succeed. Until next time, keep sparking, keep shifting, and keep succeeding with justice at the heart of how we lead and how we work. Now, with that said, we have come to the end of our session. Please join us next week, Monday, 18 May, where we'll have Huntley Smith on the self-mastery quotient. Until next week, stay warm and stay blessed. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you, Linda. Bye.